WJEC Eduqas was delighted to sponsor the Nate Conference again this year, and in particular to welcome two of Wales' leading poets, Paul Henry and Jonathan Edwards, to Newcastle. Paul Henry is the author of 9 books of verse. Boy Running, his latest collection, is published by Seren. Jonathan Edwards is a teacher from Cross Keys in South Wales. His collection, My Family and Other Superheroes, won the 2015 Costa Prize for Poetry. In this video, Jonathan and Paul read selections from their work and then discuss their approaches to poetry and teaching with Rhodri Jones, a WJEC subject officer for English.
I guess not many national anthems probably extol the virtues of poets and poetry, but the Welsh national anthem actually does. It calls us a glad beirdd, or land of poets, and I suppose for a fairly small country we've produced a number of great poets. Last year celebrating Dylan Thomas centenary. This year, if you didn't know, it's Alan Lewis's centenary, a wonderful poet. Fortunately, on stage today, we welcome two of our current finest Welsh poets. We have Paul Henry, who is an established poet, written 9 collections. His selected poems, The Brittle Sea, was published in 2010, and his most recent was published earlier this year, Boy Running, and it's well worth reading. Paul is also a popular teacher of creative writing, does many workshops, he's a lecturer, a songwriter. It's a wonder, really, he has any time to write poetry, I suppose, and even more than that, in the last year, he was chair of the judges for the Welsh Book of the Year Award. And one poet, obviously he was impressed by, was Jonathan Edwards, who is sitting next to me here. Jonathan is a teacher in South Wales, an English teacher, and his collection, his debut collection, My Family and Other Superheroes, was chosen on the shortlist for the Welsh Book of the Year. It didn't win, but they are still good friends, I hasten to add. But Jonathan's collection did win the Costa Prize for Poetry last year. And again, I like Paul's poetry as well worth reading.
The first poem I'll read emerged from one of my sons having his hair cut when he was 7. In Newport, and waking up to his own vanity. Daylight robbery. Silent as cut hair falling, and elevated by cushions in the barber's rotating chair, this 7-year-old begins to see a different boy in the mirror. Glances up, suspiciously, like a painter checking for symmetry. The scissors round a bend behind a blushing ear. And when the crime's done, when the sun lies in its ashes, a new child rises out of the blonde, unswept curls, the suddenly serious chair that last year was a roundabout. All the way back to the car, a stranger picks himself out in a glass-veiled identity parade. Turning a corner, his hand slips from mine like a final forgotten strand snipped from its lock. I wrote songs before I wrote poems, and when that boy had just left home, I took down a guitar from a wardrobe. We were moving house, and it was a guitar that the action had gone on it. So I hadn't played it for a good 10 years, but I'd vaguely remembered his having drawn in the dust of the guitar before I closed the lid. So he just left home, and I opened the lid of this black guitar, and I saw his name, his 8-year-old's squiggles. The black guitar. Clearing out 10 years from a wardrobe, I opened its lid and saw Joe written twice in its dust, in a child's hand. then a squiggled seagull or two. Joe. Joe, a man's tears are worth nothing, but a child's name in the dust or in the sand of a darkening beach. That's a life's work. I touched 2 strings to hear how much 2 lives can slip out of tune. Then I left it, brought down the night on it, for fear, Joe, of hearing your unbroken voice, or the sea if I played it. And my car broke down in the rush hour, and the office I was working in was increasingly populated by former steel workers and tin plate workers who were dying to push something or hammer something or hit something. So I thought, well, they'll help me push this big old Volvo round the corner into a road called Churchill Way. But in the interim between their coming down and arriving, a little elderly woman put her back to this Volvo and pushed it with me round the corner. So I thought I'd better tell these chaps they don't need to come down. Yeah. But so I went back round the corner, and I just saw these 6 men with their sleeves rolled up, looking into space. And this poem ensued about men in groups and the changing nature of work in industrial areas. 6 men in search of a car. They have left their desks in mid-sentence, come out into the early rush hour to push a car that isn't there. They have turned a corner in unison, a makeshift pack, crew, squadron, because this is what men do well, on a field, at sea, in the air. But there is nothing to put muscle into, no war, no coalface, only this space and redundancy in the faces of 6 men, as if the lift they descended in had suddenly jolted between floors. Where's the bloody car? Steel melts in their arms. They turn and lean towards a light breeze, to disparate spaces in offices filled with women's voices. A lot of the poems in my latest collection are set in a flat, and there's a flat I lived in Crickhowell, and I couldn't have any pets, so I used to walk a boxer dog from, there was a garage nearby that used to guard this garage, and it was my, it was a mixed pleasure really walking him, because he was the strongest creature I've ever walked. No pets allowed. So I walk Milo Morgan, the boxer from the garage, who is stronger than Milo of Croton, whose muscle no gym articulates, who could shit for whales, who snorts and salivates a snail trail down my jeans. More of a spaniel man, I walk Milo Morgan, who turns into a motorboat I ski behind on grass when he spies a stray sheep. I tie him to a bench by the Usk. We are getting used to each other. He barks at the low-flying ducks. I walk Milo Morgan. There is beauty in a crushed expression. The same sun warms his face and mine. And finally, this poem, Sold, is, it's always struck me that when a couple has been in a house for a long time, their love is almost shaped by that house, or it shapes itself to that house. And this poem is about the dangers of transplanting that shape of the years to another building. And thank you for listening, and I'll finish on this. Sold. Others want this house, and soon we must either leave or stay. Is it the house or love we are moving out of? Perhaps we cannot say. But it hurts. All afternoon our marriage has moved inside me. The boys, the prints on the stairs, the broken down cars, the holidays in heaven and hell, long Saturdays in market towns, mad neighbors. I pick you a pear from the tree, but you have disappeared again into that silence you inhabit, your second home, where a whisper might fall heavily to the floor, an incendiary, pear-shaped and loaded with pain. Shall we stay or leave then, love? It's only the years moving inside us, and everything hurts in autumn. Where shall we put them, the years in our new house, the years we are moving out of?
If you ever go to a poetry reading and a slightly intense-looking young man stands up in front of you and says those terrifying words, "Now I'm going to read a poem about my mother," you might get very scared. You might find yourself moving unconsciously towards the door. Thankfully, this afternoon, all the doors are locked. So now I'm going to read a poem about my mother. It's also a poem about books. It's about the voice that my mother read to me in when I was a kid, which is an incredible tone of voice, a tone of voice that we never really rediscover at any point in our lives, and which is incredibly important, I think, for fostering a love of English. This poem also has a very stupid, knees-up Mother Brown sort of form, which you'll notice. The voice in which my mother read to me isn't her good morning, good afternoon, good night voice. Her karaoke as she dusts make furniture polite voice. Her saved for neighbours' babies and cooing our dog's name voice. It isn't her best china, not too forward, not too shy voice, or her dinner's ready, your room looks like a sty voice, or her whisper in my ear as she adjusts my tie voice. It's not her roll-in Friday night, Lucy in the sky voice, her Sunday morning, smartest frock, twinkle in the eye voice, that passing gossip of the vicar with the communion wine voice. It's not her gatto, no, I scream, no, I can't make the choice voice. It's not her decades late, fourth change, is this skirt smart enough voice. It's not her caught me with a girl from number 21 voice. That voice which you reserve for 12-foot grannies, deep south hobos, that sleepy secret staircase, selfish giants, lilliput voice. That tripping over, boy, why is your house so full of books voice? A couple of weeks ago, I had to read in a bookshop, and they wanted me to read for an hour, read poems for an hour. Can you imagine? I would have been dead by the end. And I said to my year 11, I'm very worried about this, you know, an hour of reading poems. What am I going to do? How am I going to keep these people engaged? I need to build in some sword swallowing or something. My year 11, ever reassuring, said, don't worry, it'll be absolutely fine, because after 5 minutes, no one will be listening anyway. But time, you see, time is something that bothers me. The fact that time just keeps going and you can't sort of step sideways for a minute or go backwards. So this is a poem about time. The classic texts about time, there are three, aren't there? Great Gatsby, Ode to a Nightingale, and Back to the Future, featuring Michael J. Fox. This is a poem about the last of those three. This is about the death, Doc Emmett Brown in the first Back to the Future movie getting killed, and the way that they keep coming back to the scene of his death in lots of different reincarnations. So this is called The Death of Doc Emmett Brown in Back to the Future. I sit here in the darkness with my father, slurping Pepsi, passing popcorn round. The Libyans come fast around the corner, pump Doc Brown with automatic fire. My feet are dangling inches from the ground. I sit here in the darkness with my father as Marty hits 88 miles an hour, goes back to 55 to warn Doc Brown. The Libyans come fast around the corner, pump Doc Brown with automatic fire. He gets up, dusts his bulletproof vest down. I sit here in the darkness with my father, who starts to gently snore. Now time goes quicker. The cinema's knocked down, moved out of town. The Libyans come fast around the corner on DVD. My boy asks for Transformers instead, as from the wall, his bump looks down. I sit here in the darkness with my father. The Libyans come fast around the corner. At the back of this book, there's a sequence of animal poems, and this is one of those. I had some money a couple of years ago from Literature Wales, to an amazing organisation, Literature Wales, to write some poems. So you get some time off work and you just sit and write poems all day, which is an amazing thing. But you get to about the 8th day of this and you get out of bed and you think, what the hell am I going to write poems about today? Because all your ideas are done. And at the same time, I had this flyer from a zoo, and on the front of this flyer was a hippo. Full action shot of a hippo emerging from the water, jaws wide open. It looked amazing, this thing. And I thought it has to be a poem. So I dutifully went to the zoo and sat in front of the hippo tank with pen and paper poised, ready to make a note of every aspect of hippo behavior and immortalize this thing on the page. And the hippo, all day long, as I sat there, did nothing. Nothing at all, just lay there, beneath the line of water in his tank, and didn't move, and didn't show himself. So the kind of Hollywood pitch meeting plot synopsis of this poem is, I go to see a hippo, but I don't see it. The hippo is solo, hobo, incognito, two boulders curving out of Dettel murk. In a zoo, his photo advertises, doing a sponsored sitting still all day. Stop being a cliche, hippo, or I won't write a poem about you. Then you'll be sorry. What is your body but the verb to wallow? What is the water but a part of self? Google says you can crush a Ford Sierra between your jaws. They don't say how they test this. Candy floss high boys crowd your glass, betting they could hold their breath underwater longer. They could leap from one boulder to the other. I abandon you for the giraffes, stupid as window cleaners. The lions, sunshine with teeth, but keep coming back. If you were to rise, show your eyes, your mouth, would you have Martin Sheen's mud-crazy face, breaking smoke water in Apocalypse Now? Closing time. One last go. Oh, please, hippo, don't be so self-effacing, so tight-fisted. Come on out. Don't you know we love you? Wait, is that a flash of flesh, a hippo peep show, or are you still snoozing? A little girl says, Dad, that island's moving. And just one more, I think. This is my first time ever in Newcastle. It's an amazing, beautiful city. And for me, growing up, Newcastle was always Peter Beardsley and Paul Gascoigne. So inevitably, I'm going to read a poem about football since I'm here. Amazingly, Wales are going to qualify for the European Championships. I shouldn't say that before it's happened, but they're going to do it. For the first time in 60 years, just an amazing thing. And this is a poem about the Welsh national football team. It spends time with the Welsh national football team in 1991 in a match they were playing against West Germany, actually Germany, because they'd just gone through political reunification, which I'm still absolutely convinced was just a ploy for Germany to get more players for their football team, you know. West Germany had just won the World Cup, and there was no way that Wales could win this match, but they did. They won 1-0, and Ian Rush scored. And this was the first football match that I ever went to with my father when I was 12 years old. So this poem uses all of this to get to my father about 20 years ago. So I'll just finish with this one with great thanks for listening. The greatest living Welsh practitioner of the English language, Rod Gilbert, says about teachers, teachers should be chauffeur-driven to school and sprayed down with a cooling mist in warm conditions. And I'm absolutely with him on that. Thanks for listening. This opens at half-time in the Welsh changing room. 0-0. Once the changing room doors closed, the Germans out of sight, the Welsh team can collapse. There's Kevin Ratcliffe, belly up on the treatment table. Sparky Hughes' body sulks in the corner, floppy as the curls which he had then. All half, they've barely had a kick. Big Nev Southall throws his gloves to the floor like plates in a Greek restaurant, as, in tracksuit and belly, Terry Yoreth looks round at a room of panini faces. He doesn't know yet he will never get them to a major finals. He does know what to say. Ryan Giggs, still young enough to be in a boy band, stands up, doing an impression of his poster on my wall. The crowd begins to ask for guidance from the great Jehovah, and Ian Rush's famous goal-scoring moustache perks up. He's half an hour away from the goal that cues the song that makes his name 5 syllables. What he doesn't know is I'm in the stand in my father's coat, storing things to tell at school next day. My father pours more tea from his work flask and says, "We got them now, but watch," and asks again if I'm too cold. What we don't know is we'll speak of this 20 years from now. One of us retired, one a teacher, in a stadium they'll build down by the river. But now it's Rushy, Sparky, Southall, Giggs. 8:45, the crowd begins to roar, wants to be fed until they want no more. The tea tastes just like metal, it's too hot, and something catches right here on the tongue. The changing room door opens and they step out, toe-touching, stretching, staring into the future. It's time to be the people we'll become.
But in terms of getting pupils to, enjoy poetry, to want to go up to the mountain and read, or sit in their bedrooms and read poetry, how do you get them to do that rather than just see poetry as an equation to solve or as something to work out in an exam in order to get a certain letter at the end of year 11 or whatever it might be? What would you suggest as poets yourselves could teachers do to get people to enjoy poetry?
Well, I mean, I think we all know that it's very difficult, and I mean, apart from getting a writer in, of course, I think to just I mean, there are obviously there are recordings, there are films, there are song lyrics. There's generally one or two pupils who are writing songs, and I've used that a lot. But I think really to look for understanding through emotion, to look at the emotional response first, which I'm sure that's what everybody does anyway. But it's I mean, I always ask, how does this poem make you feel, and then move into the devices of poetry, then move into meter, image, metaphor, and so on.
I think for me, anything to do with narrowing the gap between what's on the page and great writers and people's own lives and their own experiences. So the more that someone can kind of internalize what a writer is saying and make it accessible and applicable to their own lives, So, I mean, I can remember when I was in university doing this. I don't know how I ended up doing this course. I think I must have been drunk when I filled in the options form or something. But I ended up doing this course on Kant and Freud and Marx and these people who had no idea what they were talking about. But we had this amazing teacher who incredibly complex ideas in kind of Baudrillard and Jameson and these kind of post-modern theorists, he would explain by talking about Star Trek and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and then I kind of got them. So, I mean, that's really my tactic. If I'm teaching Gatsby or something, I'll talk about Back to the Future or something like this. The problem, of course, is that in 10 years' time, the kids will be watching programs that I've never heard of. That's the problem with that technique. But I do think that the less that these seem like kind of great dusty writers, and the more that these seem like people who are writing something about our experience, the better. I mean, Fern Hill, I think, we've all been children, and there are people having that experience now. And the other thing is, as you say, creative writing workshops, I mean, the joy and the pleasure and the play of creative writing workshops and the way that they can unlock something that, even in a kid who doesn't like the kind of traditional academic side of English. And taking people out as well, taking them to the beach or just walking around town. Because if I'm writing, there's a certain amount of the day that I can kind of sit in a room and write, but then I need to go out, and yet we expect children to kind of sit in a classroom and write. We've got a graveyard just behind our school, which is brilliant. I take the kids to the graveyard all the time, and we write little stories based on what's on the tombstones, and usually we'll all make it back as well, which is a bonus.
Yeah, I have a workshop. I think I call it Paparazzi Poets, where it's simply the biro is the camera. And through that but we begin with poems. We begin with there's a Martian school of poets, Craig Raine, Christopher Reid, who are brilliant at similes. But through simile, then we edge towards metaphor and short syllabic count poems, economy of language, economy of writing. So there are lots of. I think I totally agree with moving around and yeah.
When I'm teaching poetry, the children, students will ask me, do you think the poet intended for us to find out or unpick all this stuff out of this one poem? And I just wonder that when you write, is that intention there, or are you thinking about that for the future?
I think in many respects, poems write, the best poems write themselves, so you don't, what subtext there is intuitive, or it's just there is this great mystery to poetry and what makes a poem work. So no, really. Don't know.
It's the classic question. You spend an hour on King Lear or something, and you've grilled like a passage to death, and you've picked out everything, and you've worked hard, and then a kid says at the end they probably didn't think of any of that, and it's just gutting and that happens. But I think, absolutely right. It's intuitive, but it's not intuitive for students. Like if I'd had any sense when I was a teenager, I would have spent far more time trying to become a really good footballer, because there's far more money in it. And if I wanted to do that, then Lionel Messi doesn't think about when he drops the shoulder or when he does a step over, But if you're no good at it, you have to think about that stuff. So I think that that process of practical criticism, which I really, really believe in, I think is the absolute focus of what you should do in a classroom, is a way of pupils thinking consciously about something that Shakespeare didn't have to think about it because he was that good. But I think if you're going to get anywhere with English, you have to think about that stuff at that level.
Thank you. Probably we've spoken quite a bit there just about the process of reading poetry, enjoying poetry. A final question, maybe more about writing poetry. Both of you, just from what we heard there, write a lot about family, about your local area, and is that where good poetry should come from? Is that where the poetry comes from? Is that if you're teaching poetry, is that where you try to get people to start writing? What's your approach?
Well, I think ideally you write what you know. You write out of your own experience, and it always shocks me how young people, when I've tutored in schools, how they can write about their past so vividly, and they're so young themselves. But it's not. Poetry. A lot of great poetry is the universal through the personal. So you write specifically about, a very, very. It's the flea in John Donne's room. Out of that comes the universal. So, I think it needn't be the starting point in the classroom. It needn't be where I come from, or to live in. Blaenau Festiniog is to parody an R.S. Thomas poem. It needn't be that. You could begin with an image, as we were saying earlier. It could be. I think observing is very important, but also listening. You could begin with sounds, and then beyond that, theming. I don't know about you, Jonathan, but I tend to theme a lot of my, theme the workshop to something. So you begin with poems and.
Yeah, place, I think place is fab, and also people. I really believe in people as kind of the starting point for poems. So, I mean, R.S. Thomas is brilliant at that, and it can be kind of people that you love, you know, people that we have access to, but also just people watching, you know. People watching is brilliant, you know, just go into a cafe and sit and pretend you're not looking at anyone, you know. What you were saying about the pen is the camera, that's absolutely it. But place is really good. There's a wonderful Carol Ann Duffy poem, which I use quite a lot, which isn't that well known. I don't know if it's in any of her collections, but it's called A Week as My Hometown. And she goes through the days of the week, you know, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And every day of the week is written from a point of view of a different building in the town. So there's a day which is written from a point of view of the library, a day from the point of view of a school. And it's a wonderful sort of poem for getting pupils to write about their place from different perspectives and finding a unique sort of standpoint on it.